One of the most important metaphorical roles of music in art was to communicate the concept of harmony. Harmonious relationships, both between men and women and within families, could be expressed through the depiction of a unified ensemble or duet. The implication in this painting is that the young woman will soon be joined in just such a duet. Her virtuous nature is contrasted with the painting on the wall behind her, showing a prostitute playing a lute with a procuress or brothel madam demanding payment from the prospective customer. It's been suggested that this work is a companion piece to Young Woman Standing at a Virginal. Both show solo female keyboard players gazing out at the viewer. But in this work, the viola da gamba in the foreground lies ready to be played, a direct appeal to duet with the young woman. And while the other is set during the day, here the scene takes place after dark. A visit made in the evening would be a much more private interaction than one made in the middle of the day. Now I'm joined again by the novelist Tracy Chevalier. Tracy, it's been suggested, I think many times, that this painting, A Young Woman Seated at a Virginal, is a pendant piece, a companion to the girl standing by the virginal. Do you see them in interrelated terms, or do you think they're self-contained pictures?
I go back and forth about it. You know, of course, they're hung in the same room in the National Gallery, so it's quite tempting to see them together. They are probably painted around the same time, and yet this one has a very different feel to it. It's much darker. A lot of it is quite murky. If you see the painting in the background is very murky, and the floor is a bit dingy. When you think about, usually you see those tiles kind of popping out. And what you see popping out is her face, her sleeve, and the bass viol there. She has a beautiful face, but you look at the rest of her, and some of the painting is not actually that great either. Look at those arms and the hands. As somebody who likened them to pig trotters, and I sort of laughed, and I thought, we don't normally allow ourselves to criticize master painters. We just think every painting they've done is perfect. And that's not the case even with Vermeer. I think there's a feeling of strain about this that I don't see in The Lady Standing at the Virginals in quite the same way. This is a darker piece. In the depths of your rich imagination, what kind of a man do you imagine Vermeer now as a consequence of having looked at his painting so intently? I had to make a decision about what he was like in order to write a novel about him. And what I decided was, based on the few facts we know, he had 11 children. So it would have been a huge, chaotic household. We know he lived with his mother-in-law, and we know that most of his paintings are painted in this room, in this corner, and they think it was on the first floor of his mother-in-law's house, in this one room. And I think, how could he paint these very quiet, contemplative paintings with 11 children around, and all of the servants and the wife and everybody? So is the answer that they're refuge? Painting is a form of refuge? The answer is that he compartmentalized his life. He kept his daily life away from his studio life. And so in my book that I decide, he says, you know, nobody can come into this studio, not the wife, not the kids. Oh, well, the servant can come in to clean, and that's it. So there's this, quite in a way, a slight ruthlessness about getting his time away from the family. And this is a refuge. And I think this is a painting that reveals maybe some anxiety in that refuge, that it's not such a refuge after all. There's a glistening beauty to the pearls, to the sleeve, but he didn't do that with the gold around this painting there, where he does in some of the other paintings that we see in this gallery. He doesn't bring out the best in this scene. He leaves it dark. Tracy Chevalier, there we must leave it. Thank you. You're welcome.
The guitar player marks a compositional change from the other Vermeer pictures in the exhibition and in his oeuvre in general. Vermeer places the figure to the left of the frame, leaving a bare wall and some books to take up the remainder of the picture. The imbalance suggests a sense of movement and impending change to this deceptively simple image. With tipped head and a gentle smile, the woman fixes her gaze on something just outside. Some magnetic presence seems to threaten to pull her from our view, suggesting that she now plays not for us, but for an unseen visitor. Whilst on loan from Kenwood House, the guitar player has been subject to an extensive technical analysis here at the National Gallery. One of the most fascinating discoveries is the high number of paintbrush bristles embedded in the paint, both in this and the other Vermeers on show. This could have been due to Vermeer using poor quality or older brushes, an intriguing insight into the state of his studio or even his financial situation towards the end of his life. Equally fascinating is a pair of fingerprints detected on the top edge of the guitar player, left, we presume, by the great master himself when the paint was still wet. Betsy Wiesman, as curator of this exhibition, were you surprised to discover that Vermeer didn't have a pristine studio, given that he presents such a clean vision of the world in his art?
Well, on the one hand, I wasn't so surprised because he did have 11 children. But on the other hand, I was surprised that it left a physical trace on the paintings.
So this kind of conflict that we perceive between process and the kind of immaculate way that he produces the image is one thing. But the other thing that's so remarkable about this work is the radical cropping of this figure and the fact that we're brought much more intimately and directly into the picture. Is this a radical departure in Vermeer's art, or am I overreading?
I think it is unusual, and one thing I should point out for this painting is that it is on its original strainer and the original canvas. It's never been cut or modified in any way.
So this is his intention?
Absolutely. I think that he did it in order to animate the composition and to give us a sort of sense of the unexpected, because it seems as if she's being pulled outside of the picture, and obviously she's looking off in that direction. Her attention is no longer on us, the viewer standing in front of her, but by something that we can't see, that we're not privy to. And I think that's Vermeer's way of enticing us even further, because there's something that we want to be a part of. And I think, you know, there's this subconscious feeling of jealousy. We want to be the one that she's looking at and that her attention is directed towards.
By the beginning of the 1670s, Vermeer, with a large family to feed, was desperately short of funds. In 1672, things deteriorated further. The so-called Rampjahr, Year of Disaster, saw invading armies from France, England and Germany. The economy, under these assaults, practically collapsed.
After the French invasion, the Rampjahr and all that, the art market dries up. That makes an impact on him as a painter, but also for his art dealing. So we know that he can't sell his paintings. So there was quite a few paintings left over, so that's when they have their financial problems.
The effects of the Rampjahr were certainly complicating his poor financial situation, yet Vermeer's paintings bear no signs of the crisis.
There's one great painting by Vermeer that suggests he is thinking beyond his own lifetime, and that's the Art of Painting in Vienna, where he shows an artist very much like Vermeer, who is painting a model who is a very attractive young lady holding a trombone, but she is Clio, the muse of history. And this is a very rich allegory about the status of the art of painting in Vermeer's time, and probably a suggestion that Dutch painting in particular had rose to the highest level in the judgment of people like themselves, who consider the highest level to be the greatest verisimilitude, rather than the most pretentious mythological subject or whatever. So that large painting was kept in his studio and was probably I mean, calling card wouldn't be the perfect term for it, but a kind of sign for his ability. And just imagine going up the narrow staircase in Vermeer's house, and you're there under the rafters of the roof, and there's probably one window looking out onto the town square, and a fairly humble interior with a wooden floor and maybe 2 easels and a dirty work table. And you see Vermeer's image of the artist's studio with a marble floor and a tapestry and grand decoration and much larger scale. And he's dressed like some bohemian dandy from the past. So it is a kind of dream world in that respect.
Vermeer died, possibly from a stroke, on December the 15th, 1675. His death at the age of 43 was described by his wife Katerina as, owing to the great burden of his children and having no means of his own, he had lapsed into decay.
You know that we have an inventory of Vermeer's house shortly after his death, and we see so many things in his paintings that don't turn up in the inventory. And this seems to be pretty complete. It's got his studio, etc., and there's not a single musical instrument or tapestry. There are, I think, about 16 pictures throughout the house and a few other fancy things, including the yellow ermine or imitation ermine and velvet jacket in yellow that we see in a number of pictures. But it's remarkable to see no tapestries, no brass chandeliers, apparently, and no musical instruments at all.
He was one of the greatest painters of the Dutch Golden Age, yet his brilliance only began to gain wide recognition 2 centuries later, when a French critic praised him in the 1860s. At the time of Johannes Vermeer's death, despite the wealth displayed in his paintings, he, the artist, was virtually penniless.